dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
One of the ways we care for the wider community is by contributing to MANNA, the local food bank. They accept anything that would be purchased in a grocery store, from food to personal care items. Because of your generosity, MANNA continues to grow and evolve to ensure that our neighbors are treated with dignity and empowered to increase the quality of their life. If you brought something to share, please bring it forward at this time. And we will have a story from Reverend Lora.
The stone cutter. It's a story that comes from China. It's an ancient fable. There was a stone cutter who wasn't very happy. Didn't really like his life, was really dissatisfied with being a mere stone cutter. You could say it just wasn't good enough for him. Until one day he was walking on the street and he noticed a wealthy merchant and the way that man lived, and he thought, I'd like to live that way. I think I'd like to be the wealthy merchant rather than just a lowly stone cutter. And poof, he was a merchant. Suddenly he found himself as the wealthy merchant, and who could order his servants around and wear the beautiful clothes and get respect from, well, almost everyone. Because while he was being the wealthy merchant, he noticed a government official going by on the street in his sedan chair, being carried by servants, didn't have to walk anywhere, being bowed down to by everyone, even the wealthiest. And he thought, that's who I want to be. And he was. And so he found himself as this high government official being carried wherever he went, wearing even better clothes now, having everyone bow down to him. It happened to be kind of a hot day. The sun was shining down, beating down into this sedan chair, and he started to sweat and was kind of uncomfortable and getting a little sticky. And he thought, wow, that sun sure has a lot of power. I would like to be the sun. And so he was. And he became the sun and sent his rays out to everyone and caused them to be hot and had all sorts of power until a dark cloud blocked what he was able to do. And he didn't like that. So he thought, what is this? What is that thing? I want to be that. And so he was. He was the dark cloud that now rained on all of the people in the village, causing floods, causing them to run and scream from this great power of his. Until he felt, as this storm cloud, that he was being moved away and pushed aside, and he could no longer rain down all of his power on the people of the village. And he thought, what's that? Well, it was the wind pushing him as the storm cloud. And he said, well, I'm going to be that. So he was. He became the wind that could move anything out of its way, that could go anywhere that it wanted to. It had so much worth and power, it could move almost anything. Because suddenly, as the wind, he bumped into a big block of stone, which didn't move. The wind couldn't move it. It was a strong and mighty stone. And as the stone, he thought, finally, this is it. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is the one with all the power. No one can change me. Until he felt something and heard something, a little tap, 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 and noticed that he was changing. There was something happening to him. He was changing form. He was turning into something else. And he looked down, and there was a stone cutter. Tap, 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 being who the stone cutter is. Because tomorrow is Veterans Day, a prayer, a meditation that comes from our 2010 Statement of Conscience, Creating Peace, developed by the Unitarian Universalist Association and accepted by the General Assembly in 2010. For Unitarian Universalists, the exercise of individual conscience is holy work. Conscientious discernment leads us to engage in the creation of peace in different ways. We affirm a range of individual choices, including military service and conscientious objection, whether to all wars or particular wars, as fully compatible with Unitarian Universalism. For those among us who make a formal commitment to military service, we will honor their commitment, welcome them home, and offer pastoral support. For those among us who make a formal commitment as conscientious objectors, we will offer documented certification, honor their commitment, and offer pastoral support. Our faith calls us to create peace, yet we confess that we have not done all we could to prevent the spread of armed conflict throughout the world. At times, we have lacked the courage to speak and act against violence and injustice. At times, we have lacked the creativity to speak and act in constructive ways. At times, we have condemned the violence of others without acknowledging our own complicity in violence. We affirm our responsibility to speak truth to power, especially when unjust power is exercised by our own nation. Too often we have allowed our disagreements to distract us from all that we can do together. This statement of conscience challenges individual Unitarian Universalists, as well as our congregations and association, to engage with more depth, persistence, and creativity in the complex task of creating peace. May it be so, and amen.
Our first reading is Kama's Lilies by Lynn Unger. Consider the lilies of the fields, the blue banks of Kamas, opening into acres of sky along the road. Would the longing to lie down and be washed by that beauty abate you if you knew their usefulness? How the natives ground their bulbs for flour? How the settlers' hogs uprooted them, grunting in gleeful oblivion as the flowers fell? And you, what of your rushed and useful life? Imagine setting it all down, papers, plans, appointments, everything, leaving only a note, gone to the fields to be lovely. Be back when I'm through with blooming. Even now, unneeded and uneaten, the Kamas lilies gaze out above the grass from their tender blue eyes. Even in sleep, your life will shine. Make no mistake, of course your work will always matter. Yet Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. From The Examined Life by Stephen Groves. Nowadays we lavish praise on our children. Praise, self-confidence, and academic performance, it is commonly believed, rise and fall together. But research suggests otherwise. Over the past decade, a number of studies on self-esteem have come to the conclusion that praising a child as clever may not help her at school. In fact, it might cause her or him to underperform. Often a child will react to praise by quitting. Why make a new drawing if you already made the best? Or a child may simply repeat the same work. Why draw something new or in a new way if the old way always gets applause? Shortly after qualifying as a psychoanalyst, I discussed this with an 80-year-old woman named Charlotte Stiglitz. Charlotte, the mother of the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, taught remedial reading in northwestern Indiana for many years. I once watched Charlotte with a 4-year-old boy who was drawing. When he stopped and looked up at her, perhaps expecting praise, she smiled and said, "There's a lot of blue in your picture." He replied, "Oh, it's the pond near my grandmother's house. There's a bridge." He picked up a brown crayon and said, "I'll show you." Unhurried, she talked to the child, but more importantly, she observed, she listened, she was present. Being present, either with children, with friends, or even with oneself, is always hard work. But isn't this attentiveness, the feeling that someone is trying to think about us, something we want more than praise?
Many years ago, 2 co-workers and I traveled from Dallas to Austin for an arts conference hosted by the Texas Commission on the Arts. The proposal for our small ethnic dance company to be included in the touring roster of the Texas artists had been accepted, and our Ballet Folklorico company was going to perform. Attending this conference was to be a reward for our hard work that had gone into preparing the proposal, extensive research into what it would actually cost for us to tour our company, something our small company had never done. It was the first step to being accepted into a larger roster of artists that was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. We were taking baby steps with this organization. We had been through a lot. And as the development director of the organization, I was used to writing grant proposals and speaking to potential funders to prove that our organization was good enough to receive this support. It was tough for us to even travel to Austin. As I say, we had been through a lot together, including the threat of losing the organization entirely due to lack of funds. We really needed this reward. We really needed this trip. We really needed to remind ourselves that we were good enough to even stay in business. Choreographer, performer, writer, and educator Liz Lerman was the keynote speaker for the conference. She spoke, she taught workshops, and on the final day of the conference, she created a dance in community. And it included all of us, dancers and non-dancers alike. Of her own career, Lerman, now in her 60s, says this: "I received critical acclaim and critical bruising. I got awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, from universities, from journals and newspapers and cultural institutions, and a MacArthur Genius Grant. I also received more rejections than I can count or list or remember." So when I stood up to make a contribution to the community dance all those years ago at the Texas Commission on the Arts conference, Lerman must have known what I meant when I said, those of us in the arts always struggle with being good enough. Well, all of us struggle with being good enough, of course. In his book, The Examined Life, How We Lose and Find Ourselves, psychoanalyst and University College London professor Stephen Groves points out that lavishing praise on a child does not lead to greater self-esteem. He cites recent research when he notes that often a child will react to praise by quitting. Why make a new drawing if you have already made the best? Or a child may simply repeat the same work. Why draw something new or in a new way if the old way always gets applause? Why does one generation of parents overpraise their children? probably to make up for the extreme opposite styles of their own parents. Those who were brought up without any acknowledgement of any kind want to raise their children differently than how they were raised, but this doesn't work either, according to Groves. He says, in trying so hard to be different from our parents, we're actually doing much the same thing, doling out empty praise the way an earlier generation doled out thoughtless criticism. How do we teach self-esteem, and how do we recover our own lost self-esteem? By being present, Groves says. All that is needed to recover a sense of good enough is to be present to our own inherent worth and dignity. So the religious response to good enough can be found in our first principle. And as Unitarian Universalists, we do affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and that means including ourselves. The religious response to good enough is also found in one of Jesus' sayings about the lilies of the fields, a saying captured by Unitarian Universalist minister Lynn Unger in her poem, Camas Lilies. Even now, unneeded and uneaten, the Camas lilies gaze out above the grass from their tender blue eyes. Even in sleep, your life will shine. Make no mistake. Of course, your work will always matter. Yet Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. Of course, your work will always matter, but your work does not prove your worth. Your work isn't the proof you need to declare finally that you are good enough. Praise you receive for your work can be a trap, causing you to be less creative and to take less risk. Declare yourself good enough now, and praise won't matter. Only the work will matter. I am in my 4th year as a minister, beginning the third year as your minister, having been called to the ministry after a career in nonprofit management, including as development director of Dallas's Anita N. Martinez Ballet Folklorico. It took me 7 years to finish seminary, a process that included scrutiny by faculty, a career assessment led by a psychologist, and the approval of 2 different bodies of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I answered questions, I read hundreds of books, and I proved my competency in 15 different areas, including theology, world religions, human development, and administration. I know a little bit about good enough. So in January, when I participated in a retreat here with the board and the council, I recognized a familiar drum beat. I heard the rhythm of the not good enough dance starting to play. Each group of the council was asked to tie its goals for the year to the long-range plan. That means the board, the minister, the director of religious education, operations, outreach, membership, and communications all need to clearly state what it is they hope to accomplish for the year. As people stood to make their contribution to the goals of the year, I began to hear the drumbeat of not enough time, not enough money, not enough people, not enough, not enough, not enough. We live in a perfectionistic culture that causes us to respond to not enough with overfunctioning and overcompensating. When the work doesn't get done exactly the way we think it should be done, we step in and do it ourselves. Taking over and correcting someone's efforts is just as damaging to their self-esteem as offering hollow praise. As your minister, I have discovered that the perfectionistic culture here mirrors my own need to prove that I am good enough. I am humbled by the opportunity to remind us all that whether we hang on to these buildings or not, whether we have to reduce staff or not, that somehow we are all good enough. That our shared ministry right now is exactly the ministry that is needed. And as we appreciate who we are as a congregation, amazingly, pledges are increasing, and worst-case scenarios are fading away. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. And I'm so glad you heard that, because as I wrote this, I thought, boy, they're going to get stuck on the first thing that I said instead of the second thing, because that's how our brains work. Have you noticed that as we declare ourselves as a generous people, we become generous? As we declare ourselves as good enough, we become good enough. Our work will always matter. Another religious response to good enough can be found in the Tao Te Ching, best explained to the Western mind in Benjamin Hoff's classic, The Tao of Pooh. When Hoff recounts the Chinese fable of the stonecutter who doesn't recognize his own value, it is the famous English bear, Winnie the Pooh, that best illustrates what the story means. Pooh, the bear of very little brain, has a way of noticing the value in everyday life. Pooh can always see what is right in front of him, and he makes use of it. He knows this secret: Tao does not do, but nothing is not done. Winnie the Pooh knows the secret of good enough. The wise are who they are. They work with what they've got and do what they can do. We are all good enough because nothing is wrong. That doesn't mean that we lavish praise on our children, telling them that their tree is the best art we've ever seen. It also doesn't mean that we point out everything that's wrong with their tree. It simply means that we notice that their tree is green or brown or purple. As Stephen Groves reminds us, why draw something new or in a new way if the old way always gets applause? Being present is hard. Being present requires vulnerability. I am at my most vulnerable when I stand in this pulpit. It has become a bit of a joke around here that more than one person will come up to me after the worship service and say, "You really hit that one out of the park." I have mentioned this often enough to people. Leadership, actually, in my review each year that goes into the Unitarian Universalist Association, that I am beginning to see signs that people may be uncomfortable as they walk through that line on Sunday morning, trying to come up with something else to say. someone actually started to say, and went, gold star, put a gold star on it. I do appreciate the praise, and that's not what I'm saying right now. So if your mind is going, not good enough, she doesn't like what I say when she walks through the room, I'm not good enough, no. Please hear me. I do appreciate the praise. And I'd like to invite you into something more. If it means that for a while all you say is good morning or thank you, that's fine. It will be good enough. You could say, there's a lot of blue in your picture, and I would know what you mean. It is enough to stand here and look at your faces. It is enough to hear the stunned silence some Sunday mornings as your response. It is enough, and this has happened so many times, it is enough to watch you sing hymns after we've come through yet another act of senseless violence in our world. It is enough to watch you struggle with the words in hymns, making sense of how we all move through this world together. I am at my most vulnerable in the pulpit because you are at your most vulnerable when you show up here each Sunday. This is not a performance. I do not need your applause. I need your presence. Because the work that we do here matters. Now, the Good Enough dance that I participated in, all those years ago, the arts conference, wasn't a performance either. It wasn't even a good enough dance. It was a larger dance that had all sorts of things in it. Participants shared what the conference meant to them. And as they stood and shared, they would gesture, they would shift their weight, they would raise their arms, and these became movements in the dance. Good enough became this because I had stated good enough with quotation marks around it. And then it moved here. For weeks, the three of us who had attended that conference would spontaneously break into the entire dance. A reminder of how we had gone to Austin, learned that we were good enough. We were good enough to keep that little organization afloat. Reminder of the time that we had spent with other struggling artists, with other struggling humans. I think it's been more than 15 years now, and all I remember is the good enough part. And that is, well, it's good enough. So, 10 years ago, I entered seminary. And as I said, I have been scrutinized to make sure I was good enough to be your minister over and over and over and over. I've told my story. I've filled out paperwork. I've written essays. I've appeared before the Regional Subcommittee on Candidacy, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, on and on and on. And 4 years ago, in December, I was approved by the Ministerial Fellowship Committee into what is called preliminary fellowship, requiring a renewal for 3 years in a row. A renewal that's filled out by each congregation that I have served. There have been 3. The Committee on Ministry fills out this 8-page form. The board fills out this 8-page form, and I fill out an 8-page form. 3 separate documents to prove to the Ministerial Fellowship Committee of the Unitarian Universalist Association that I am good enough. I know people that it's taken them 9 years to move from preliminary fellowship to final fellowship, because if you have one bad year, you have to start again. And so, here is the letter that I received Friday. Dear Reverend Brandis, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee convened during a special November 1st conference call to vote on renewal applications submitted by the July 1st, 2013 deadline. After reviewing your submission, the MSC voted to grant you final fellowship. Now, and I'll accept your applause. Here is the part that you must hear, because they include comments from the committee. And this, you have to remember that I received this letter Friday. Congratulations on your continued good work. Your stewardship ministry and Theology Ablaze theme are particularly inspiring. As you move forward in final fellowship, we hope you will continue to do all you can to temper your perfectionism and open yourself to the beauty to be found in the good enough. So one last thing that I would like to share with you, if you would get to your your feets. We're going to add good enough into our body prayer that we occasionally do in here. And you may remember this, and hopefully you're practicing this, but if you're not, you're good enough anyway. We always start here with this expression of how good it is to be here. Some say the words from the poem E.E. Cummings, thank God for most this amazing day, or some other affirmation of just being happy to be alive, deserving the great gift of life. And so we will do this in silence. We start here, we'll move to adding good enough, and then we'll move out here, and here in our arms raised wide as a chalice, we accept everything that the day has to offer us. And then our arms move back here out to the world, giving all that we have to give back to this world. So we'll do this in silence. This will be our community dance this morning. Let's do it 3 times, because then we'll get it right by the 3rd time. It'll be good enough. Okay? So in silence, because you're saying those words to yourself in your head. And if you need these words, they're in your order of service. Reaching down and picking those up, we'll say those words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please remain standing as we sing our final hymn, number 311, Let It Be a Dance. As you leave this place, may you be open to the beauty found in the good enough. Go in peace, blessed be, and amen.
We are the Caneo Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Like us on Facebook, check out our website at CVUUF.org, or come visit us. See you soon!